Welcome to the Lauer Vineyard Tour. We're happy to have you. We begin with an overview of the Mosel. The blue pin you may see, just about in the center of the screen, is in Piersport, where Julian Hart's main sites are. Up in the top right of the screen, you can see Traben-Trabach, where Weiser, Kunstler, Vollenweider, and Tenstedt are. A few more bends up the river, that's Alf, where Uli Stein and Philipp Lardot and Rosalie Curtin are. Yet the Saar, this small tributary of the Mosel, is quite a bit south. By car, it's nearly an hour from Piersport to Lauer's tiny village of Isle on the Saar. Let's float on down there right now. Here we go, down, there we are. Yep, Florian and his family live in what they call downtown Isle. You see the yellow pin? I'd guess 12 tractors pass in front of the estate every day. Downtown traffic, what can you do? Now, before we get to the main star of the show, the coupe, let's check out two very underrated and overlooked sites. As things get warmer, these two sites, the Rauberg and the Scheiderberg, are making more and more serious wines every year. The village wine, number 25, comes from the Rauberg. The coolness of the site gives the wine an intense saltiness and a bright acidity. Just behind the Rauberg is the Scheiderberg. The best parts of this site have recently been upgraded to an Erste Lage, or Premier Cru site, by the VDP. Most, or all of the Barrel X comes from the Scheiderberg, depending on the vintage. These are both serious sites. But let's spin around now to begin our investigation of Lauer's playground, the formidable Eiler Coupe. Our first stop is at the southeast tail of the Eiler Coupe. It's called Wald on old maps, and outlined by a green line here, where there are 70-year-old plus ungrafted vines. This is where the wine called Senior comes from, named in honor of Florian's grandfather, who loved this wine and would frequently reserve the cask from this site for his personal consumption by simply writing Senior on the barrel. Next, we slide down just a bit to the cairn, outlined here in yellow, one of the most complete of the Eiler Coupe wines, as it has the whole cross-section from the top to the bottom of the site. The name cairn comes from the industrialists who cleared this site in the late 19th century when the Mosel and the Saar were at the height of their fame. The vines are old here as well, 70 years old and more. Cairn is normally gently off-dry in style, yet with Lauer, it's always about the balance. Next is the curious Neuenberg, one of the most historically important parcels in the Eiler Coupe. The site has wet fields directly below it, which create a cool and damp haze around the vines, leading to a very clean and a very delicate botrytis. This gives the wine a concentration and a slightly exotic quality. Florian's father planted these vines with future generations in mind, as the site was still too cold to make great wine in his day. Finally, we arrive at the warmest and oldest part of the Eiler Coupe, as it ends right in front of the Saar River, which we'll see in a moment when we move out to view the Schönfels. But first, we look at the Unterstenberg. Even in Roman times, they noticed the snow melted quickly in this area, and they planted grapes during the earliest days of cultivation in the Saar. This parcel sits at the foot of the hill. The wines it produces are deep and powerful, heady. Over the last few years, they have fermented dry a few times. Next is the fillet section of the coupe, represented by the middle section of vines outlined in yellow. This is where the coupe GG comes from. This was replanted in 1956 by Peter Lauer Sr., and this is the steepest and warmest part of the slope. It's perhaps the most elegant of the GG wines, with fine layers and a suave, polished finesse. It has both fruit and depth, and a mineral core of slate and salt. Finally, at the top of this section, that third row, as it were, outlined in yellow, this is the stern. Stern translates to forehead, which makes some sense as it's the summit of the slope. Here there's very little water, and the interplay of this fact and the extreme wind and the coolness of the site makes the stern a kind of baby cabinet, usually quite off-dry and soaringly angelic, with a polished, fine acid. As we round the end of the coupe, this, the east side, outlined in green, this is where wines such as number 3 come from, a kind of spiritual kin to the stern. Again, this is another area that has benefited tremendously from the warming climate, now turning out serious wines of finesse and balance. Now, yikes, hold on. We'll zoom out a bit and head further upstream, that was quick, to the other side of the village. And here we have one of the greatest sites of the Saar, called the Schönfels. This awesome cliff vineyard flaunts 110-year-old ungrafted vines, and while the vineyard has always had a huge reputation, Florian's father let the site go fallow in the 1980s. The reason? It was simply too expensive, too difficult, and too dangerous to farm. You can't quite tell because of the resolution of the Google Earth tour, as well as the fact that the cliff is covered with grasses and small trees, but right below the Schoenfels, what appears to be a foresty green, is really a sheer rock face that drops a few hundred feet to the street below. During harvest, the crew that harvests the lowest section of the Schoenfels must be harnessed in via a carabiner to a tractor parked at the top of the vineyard. There can be no slipping here. It is truly a matter of life or death. Florian's decision in the late 2000s to rehabilitate the site was equal parts daring, brilliant, insane, and very risky. But good lord, these wines are serious. In most vintages, there's a GG and a cabinet, and the Schoenfels is always ruthlessly mineral. Next, we slide down the hillside to the tiny Lampertskirche. This minuscule 0.2 hectare site was cleared of the overgrown brush in 2010 by Florian. This was another reclaimed site like the Schoenfels, but unfortunately the vines here needed to be replaced completely as a former owner had ripped out everything and planted an orchard. Yep, they had ripped out the vines and planted an orchard in one of the most famous sites in the Saar. Ugh. Florian replanted the site from selection Massal cuttings of the oldest Riesling vines from various famous locales in the Mosel. The first vintage was 2014. In most vintages, this vineyard produces a GG, which almost always goes to the German auctions, as well as a tiny amount of Cabernet. Okay, to round things up, let's visit the Sonnenberg. It's not a wildly important site for Lauer, to be honest. It's also a site that has really only come online in the last few decades thanks to the Saar Canal that you see in the foreground. This little body of water now warms the site. Previously, it was often hit hard with frost. This is where a number of the off-dry village-level Rieslings come from. Finally, our tour comes to an end at the Pfalz. This is a unique site for the Saar in a number of ways. First, you'll note that it's right up against the Saar River. While in the Mosel this is common, in the Saar it's rather unique. Many of the Saar's greatest sites, the Koop, Bockstein, Scharzhofberg, run perpendicular to the river. Thus, generally speaking, they are cooler. Thus, again, generally speaking, we have that piercing, arrow-like acidity that has made the Saar one of the most hallowed Riesling terroirs on earth. Yet the Pfalz is unique in its rather direct relationship with the river. It's also an interesting site because the river pushes up against it and flows around the vineyard, giving the site a good amount of alluvial soil, especially toward the bottom. It's a warmer site. It's also sneakily steep. Convex like the backside of a spoon, the vineyard begins mildly as you walk through it, heading down to the river. However, as one reaches center slope, the incline becomes quite severe. The lowest third of the vineyard is extremely steep. The wine the Pfalz produces is one of the most textural and luscious of the GGs. From the beginning, it can show a rather broad range of fruit and spice. It also tends to drink earlier than Lauer's other GGs, though obviously this can change vintage to vintage. Okay, let's zoom out and head to maybe 20,000 feet. Whoa, that was a lot. I designed most of this tour, and I wrote it and narrated it, and I'm still a bit confused. But this scene now with the village of Isle, Lauer's estate marked there by the yellow pin, the Koop, all the sites we've just visited outlined and seen from above, this should give you a sense, I hope, of where Lauer's really singular wines come from. That said, should we watch this again a few more times? That cannot be a bad idea. Thanks for joining us. Bring Riesling to dinner parties.